welcome. Yeah, so today most of this is going to be about technical understanding. We'll go into a little bit of health and sustainability at the end, but for me, in the little over a year that I've owned the bike shop, what I've noticed is a lot of people don't have a full understanding of what electric bikes are and what they're getting involved with before they buy one. So trying to put more information out there to the public, because there's so much online and you can do research ad nauseum and still not know what you're getting when you go to purchase a bike. So with that being said, what is an electric bike? Basically, it is a bicycle, regular bicycle components, but it also has a motor, a battery, a controlling, and all the associated wire that goes with it. You may have a throttle and you may have a display, but those are not necessarily parts of an electric bike. So we're going to kind of go through a couple of topics and then I'm going to tie some things in together, because this is also what is an electric bike. Pedal assist versus throttle. So a lot of people, when they think of an electric bike, they have very different conceptions based on what they've read or maybe a friend's bike that they have ridden. It can be either or. Pedal assist basically means that when you get on a bike and you start applying force to the pedals, it will kick on and the motor will give you some amount of assistance. Now there are a ton of wide-ranging bikes out there, so you may only get one level of assistance, but most these days come with multiple levels, 3, 4, 5 levels of assistance to give you different outputs as you press the button and go up. Throttle means you get no pedaling, or you get assistance from the motor without pedaling. And I did bring a couple of bikes, so this one is a quick, easy one for me to model for you guys with the throttle and the no assistance. So I'm going to pick this up, and I don't have to pedal, and that motor's going to start. So many people think that electric bikes may only have pedal assist. That's not true by law, and we'll get into Oregon versus federal here in a minute, but it can be both. I'm not going to go through all of this because that's a lot, but we're going to look at two specific parts of this. So by federal law, and this is important because a lot of people like bike riding and they take their bikes to other places, whether it's state parks, national parks, or just other states and places around the country that may not abide by our laws. So federal law, if you're on federal property, it is a 2- or 3-wheeled vehicle, fully operable pedals, and an electric motor of less than 750 watts, whose maximum speed on a paved-level surface, when powered solely by such a motor, ridden by an operator who weighs 170, they're very specific, is less than 20 miles per hour. This is the part with the throttle and not. Law permits e-bikes to be powered by a motor alone or a combination of motor and human power. So the second part of that is the tiered classification system that is kind of the federal guideline. Class 1 electric bikes are bicycles equipped with a motor that provide assistance, and they can go up to 20 miles per hour. So in that case, that bike is not allowed to have a throttle. The red bike to my left is a bike that would fit a Class 1 tier because it has assistance up to 20 miles per hour, and then it will cut off the speed. At that point, you will not go any faster due to the governor, and there is no throttle on it. Class 2 electric bikes will go up to 20 miles per hour and have a throttle. The throttle is what makes that the Class 2. And Class 3 electric bikes are up to 28 miles per hour, whether it has a throttle or not. So I have some bikes in the shop that will go up to 28 miles per hour with no throttle. I have some with a throttle that go up to that as well. Oregon law, max output of 1,000 watts. So the verbiage in these becomes important in a moment, and I'll go a little more detail, but Oregon allows for a max output of 1,000 watts, may not exceed 20 miles per hour under motor power alone. And by motor power alone, that is the throttle that they're talking about. And so that does mean it can go faster with motor and human power, but motor power alone, it can't go past the 20. No license, registration, or insurance required to operate in the state of Oregon, which is often a question that we get. 16 is the legal age minimum, so technically if you have a 10-year-old out there, they're not supposed to be on the electric bike unless it's a cargo bike riding with a parent. may be ridden where traditional bikes are allowed, except for where otherwise specified by the local law. And one specific Oregon law is that they are prohibited from being on sidewalks, where depending on where you're at in Oregon, you may ride a regular bicycle on a sidewalk. And then bicycle riders this is a newer one that I get questions on, and I know maybe is even one of those things for general public that aren't bike riders, is bicycle riders, our Oregon law adopted the Idaho law, where they are allowed to treat a stop sign and a red blinking light, not a solid red light, but a red blinking light like a yield sign. And the thought behind that is, we want to be safe as bicycle riders. We're going to approach them cautiously. The evidence suggests, based on the studies, that when a bicycle rider comes to a full stop, and these are non-electric powered bicycles more often than not, right? It takes so much momentum and energy to get going that they're in the intersection longer and become more of a risk and hazard. So there's studies that support that bicycle acting as a yield and rolling through is safer than having them come to a full stop, and that was adopted in 2019. Okay, this is where that wattage thing comes into play, and this is what's an electric bike. This is just a specific brand that we're aware of. Many brands fall into this category that folks buy online, bring to us, and then they want to work on it. This specific bike has a 1,000-watt motor with a peak motor power of 1,300 watts. So this is the 1,000-watt motor. That's the 1,300-watt peak. By Oregon law, it cannot exceed 1,000 watts. So if you bought a 1,000-watt motor, every motor has a motor wattage with a peaking motor rating. So somebody that has a 1,000-watt motor that's printed on the motor, I won't work on it because it's not an electric bike. Because it exceeds the 1 horsepower rule, which has been designated, and that 1,000-watt motor in Oregon, it's now classified as a moped even if it doesn't exceed 28 miles per hour. My insurance company won't cover me unless I go get moped insurance, and I'm not, because I'm not working on mopeds. So that is a very common misconception that I have found in the electric bike world. We get people with 1,000, 1,500-watt motors all the time come to us, want us to work on their bikes, and I'm not insured to do it. And most people in the valley find there's really not anybody that does work on it, which is a big setback for, again, this person goes, hey, this is a cool bike, it's a good price, I want to buy it, it's going to meet all my needs, only to find they run it around for 6 months a year, have their first electrical problem, and then nobody will take care of it for them. So it's really important to read kind of those fine prints when you're going in on things. And again, the federal is 750 watts, so if you got a bike and you know you want to travel around the country, every state's different. Several have adopted the 3-tier system. Some have no system. Some have a partial designation for e-bikes. It's still a new enough thing that if you're thinking, hey, I'm retired, I'm going to do the RV life and go around the country, reading up on some of those laws will be more practical and important, because you could find most of the bikes aren't going to work in other states.
So what will be the 750? The 1,000-watt will be the 750 in federal?
They're going to list, almost all bike manufacturers are going to list the wattage on the bike. Okay. Some of them will tell you what the peak watts are. But basically you should know if it says 750, it's peaking out higher than that. If it says 500, it peaks higher than 500. So 1,000 is like kind of just a clear no-go. As soon as it says 1,000, you know it's over the 1,000 limit.
So you don't want anything that's over 1,000?
Ideally in Oregon, you want 750. So the question being, what wattage? Oregon, if you're 750, it should peak out right close to 1,000, but not exceed that. Once you hit 1,000, it's going to peak out over 1,000, and so it's a no-go. You'll find you mostly don't need a high wattage motor, and we can get into that a little bit more here in a little bit. The big local law that I like to make sure everybody knows, especially because more people are riding the Greenway, whether you're electric or not, it is 15 miles per hour. My personal thing is when I come up on a person or I'm coming around a corner, I try to slow around to 10, just so it's a calmer transition. People got iPods or ear pods in and stuff and not paying attention. And so it's just, I think, a good courtesy to have, but 15 is the max, and it's not just electric bikes that exceed that. Road bikes can go 20 plus miles per hour easy when they're cruising. But I do know, again, especially with people getting those bigger motors, not knowing they're not electric, some of those bikes get up 30, 35 miles per hour, and it is really easy for them to, create hazardous situations on the greenway with walkers and regular bike riders. That's the other thing with the 28 miles per hour on that last slide. I should have captured that with the tiered one. So yeah, a lot of these bikes can go over 28 miles per hour on a flat surface with these higher motors. So that's another piece of it. I had a guy in recently, drove up and brought us his bike, and it was clearly a big motor. It was a 3,000 watt motor, and we're like, we can't work on it. He's like, and we started explaining to him some of this stuff because he bought it online, and he's like, oh yeah, man, this thing goes like 40 miles per hour. And I'm like, yep, that's an electric motorcycle. That is not an electric bike. So again, it's one of those things, no more than 28 miles per hour with human and motorized assist. With that, the throttle bikes, all of these throttles will cut off at 20 miles per hour. So even if the bike can go 28 with you and the motor, the throttle itself will only go 20. Okay, so 4 major electrical considerations that I think are important. We could go into a lot of other stuff, but I think the big ones to think about are throttle versus no throttle, motor type, cadence versus torque, and battery life expectancy. So the first one, throttle versus no throttle. Oh, I'm skipping, motor type. Mid-drive, rear hub, front hub. For case in point for this session, I'm not really going to go into front hub too much more than to say it's the most dangerous of the 3. The only place it seems to have a good application is on tricycles, because having 2 motors in the back, if you don't have a mid-drive, doesn't make sense. But on a regular bike, kind of like when you slam on the front brakes, being more dangerous than applying pressure to the rear, the front hub can cause more spin-outs and wipeouts. So most people in the industry aren't putting them on a front hub unless it's a tricycle. So the big 2 we're going to look at are mid-drive versus rear hub. So I have a picture up here, and we'll go through it a little more, but also on the floor below me, mid-drive is going to be this little red folding bike over here in front. So this picture is maybe not the best now that I'm seeing it up here under the lights, but the motor is right here in the crank, which again, right over here, that's down here on this red bike. They're actually the same brand bikes. This one just happens to be a slightly different version. So it's built into the bottom bracket of the motor, or bottom bracket of the bike frame, sorry. They're more expensive to manufacture. That's for a couple of reasons, just the way they're made. And secondly, they have to be fitted to the bike frame. So because it's becoming a part of the bike design, it's not just being slapped in the back of a wheel. Often that means more upfront costs for the design to fit that for the manufacturer. So it's like having pre-built cabinets from Lowe's or Home Depot versus going and getting custom cabinets made. Custom cabinets are always going to be a little more pricey. They have higher tolerances for better efficiency and longevity, offer a smoother transition between pedal assist levels because they're just an overall more efficient, honed-in kind of design. Motors generally require a certified mechanic. Some of the other systems with the hubs that we'll talk about, some people can usually get by with those, but because these are a little more intricate, takes a little more technological understanding of them, and they rarely have throttle features. I won't say never, because some bike manufacturers are going to putting throttles on mid-drives, but most of them do not have it. And because of some of the programming and stuff with the throttle, the risk to damaging the motor, because it is in the drive crank, is a little more higher for that, and that's a big reason why they don't put them in there. The other one is the rear hub, which would be in these photos. It's here in the back end of this bike, and it's down there in that rear wheel of the bike on the floor. They're built into the rear wheels, so basically anybody can take and put a motor fit for a specific wheel and then fit it on any bike that's going to fit that wheel. So that's a big reason why they are cheaper than the ones that are going in the mid-drive. They're less durable than the mid-drives, and they're prone to overheating, which is a big downside to them, especially with abuse of throttles. So that's where A lot of people want more of a moped feel on an electric bike. They don't want to pedal. If you're just planning to throttle around and never pedal your bike, most electric bikes are not geared up and rated to handle that. If it's a good quality bike, it'll have a sensor in it and it will trip out on the temperature and shut the bike off, and you'll just have to wait 15 minutes or so for it to cool down and start it back up. But if it's not designed well, or if it's an extreme overuse, it can fry the components like the hall sensors in the motor or the wiring or something. So that's a big risk with that one. Flat tire repair is a little more challenging. So on the mid-drive, because there's nothing going on in those wheels, it's just a regular tire repair, and that's one of the most common issues we have with bicycles, whether it's motorized or not. With the rear hub ones, there's a few extra wires and a couple extra tools that are nice to have because it's a little more involved to get it in and out. If you're not highly confident in your mechanical skills, it's best recommended to have a bike shop do it. We have had clients who thought they were okay to take and change it out, not seat their wheel back in properly, go to turn on the bike and it spins out and then it rips wires. So it doesn't happen often, but it is a risk and something to watch out for. Because it has a throttle, classifying them as a class 2 or class 3 makes them less legal. Again, definitely national parks as of right now. Most national parks say class 1, but things keep changing. They just did some guidelines with the the federal lands came out with kind of designations, and I know some areas like in Colorado were early adopters and they were waiting for it, and they came out with, okay, these are the parts we're going to take. Other places are still going through and kind of planning accordingly and changing their regulations, but that's one of those things that just because the federal lands have said, hey, you can have this here, doesn't mean that everybody's going to adopt it. Some will make them more stringent, some will make it the most available as possible, and that's going to be kind of on the consumer to figure that out as they go. One of the things I do tell people, though, that get the benefit of the throttle and want to take it to somewhere where there might not be a throttle allowed, most of these are extremely easy to disconnect. This one, for example, is simply a twist right here, and then I disconnect it. And I think if you disconnected your throttle and had it zip tied knowing you were going to a park that didn't allow it, most people would be understanding like, oh yeah, you've clearly disabled that, I can't use my throttle. So I think that's something that will come up more as these become, more mainstream than they are. They're getting there. Yes?
So if you're in a federal park and you're riding your bike and you do get pulled over, is there a ticket, or do you know what the penalty is?
It's federally, I'm not sure what the citation amount is. I mean, they will cite you. People get cited on Bear Creek Parkway for exceeding the 15 miles per hour. So I think it's the discretion of whoever's doing the citing, obviously, and the area. I don't know that I'm sure there is a federal minimum amount. I just don't know what it is off of the top of my head. Sometimes it's just a warning, and sometimes it'll be an actual fine and fee, and they'll send you in. But I haven't spent a lot of time on federal land. I know those things keep changing and updating, and so I want to say like minimum of 250, but you can't quote me on that one. Yes?
If you don't have a throttle, what controls motor speed?
So two things, the programming inside the bike and your pedaling. So, and that depends on the type of bike, and we're going to get into that one a little, should be the next slide. And then the other thing with the rear hubs kind of being a downside, it's not that mid-drives can't have wires external. This red bike right here, we can see those clearly right there. They're external, but on rear hubs specifically, if they are not routed well, or zip ties snap or the holder snap, there are wires right here at the bottom of this chain stay, and I'm not sure if the people in the back can see that. Commonly what happens is somebody's pedaling, they forget to zip tie it really well. When they take the wheel on and off, they unplug it when they are pedaling and kick it, because those are running external from the inside where the controller is all the way to the back. And so that's a common thing that happens with those motors as well. Okay, so cadence versus torque, and this is going to answer your question about motor speed a little bit. So I'm going to let you guys read what's here on the screen, and I'm going to give you my spiel about cadence versus torque sensing. So cadence is the older first technology. Basically, how cadence works is a series of magnets that spin past each other, and as they spin past each other, that sends the signal from the battery. So it's kind of like an on-off switch. Torque sensing, on the other hand, is responding to the pressure that you put in your pedals. There's a little thin device, usually on the bike, that does a little bit of compression, and that's going to send the signal of how much power to come out of that the motor is going to get from the battery. So with that, big differences between these two. Cadence often has a slight delay when you start pedaling. So people expect to go right away and they don't. It takes depends on the bike and the manufacturer, how old it is, and manufacturing type. But it could take, a second and a half of pedaling or a full revolution or two of pedaling before you get going. If you're on a hill and you need to get a full revolution, you need that power really the most when you're starting. That can be inconvenient. It's also why a lot of those cadence sensing bikes have throttles on them. So you can get yourself a nice little start, get going, and then pedal. With that also being said, we've all been cruising down on a normal, I'm assuming most of us have been cruising down on a normal bike, and you're slowly losing speed, and so you just give it a little bump with the pedals and you keep going. When you're on cadence, because it's on and off, you're getting one level of output, and it's basically a high level of output on that pedal assist level. And so you're cruising, you just want to touch it a little, keep momentum. It boosts you pretty significantly, more than most people like. I find it is a preference. There are people that do like cadence and prefer that, but in my experience, I would say it's 80-90% prefer torque. So that's often a thing that is a thing with cadence. You have to kind of learn its habits because it's not going to feel quite as fluid as a torque sensor. And so those coupled with when you're turning, so if I'm coming up a hill and I've got a slight incline and I want the power of my motor, but I don't want it to spit me inconveniently as I go around my corner, there's tricks and stuff we teach people about braking and stuff to minimize that, but it is something that some people adapt to and some people don't. I find people that like mopeds and motorcycles and like kind of the rush tend towards cadence. People that like more mellow are going to tend towards torque. And again, torque, because you are putting pressure on the pedals, it's responding to that. So you're going lightly down the road, it's going to give you a little bit of power and adjust accordingly. You start cranking on the pedals, it's going to give you more power output. And because it's adjusting to your pressure and not giving you extra power when you don't need it, i.e. going down a flat road and pushing you out ahead, it's going to conserve more battery life, and they tend to get better ranges with a torque sensor than with cadence sensing. Yeah. Oh, thank you. I looked at this a half dozen times, reviewed it, and never caught that. Thank you very much. Appreciate that. So yes, this should say torque sensing. Appreciate that. Yeah, and so torque sensing is newer technology. It tends to be a little more expensive than cadence sensing. Shouldn't be significantly, but it can depend on the manufacturer. And I think we've covered most of those things that are on there. The thing I will also say about torque versus cadence, it really is person dependent. So I've had clients come in with different issues, and they've got plenty of money to spend on the highest end torque sensing beast that's out there. But if you've got two different legs, one's maybe partial amputated, or you've got a situation where you've had multiple injuries to a leg and you've just got different power and pressure, sometimes that's better for those people to have the cadence. I've had folks come in with, again, multiple maybe injuries and reconstructions over the years with one leg, and it's just significantly less muscle mass. They go out and torque sensing every other pedal, it's different force, so it feels very jerky to them. And they'll wind up on a cadence bike because they can get used to the other things we talk to them about. So it really does vary. I give you kind of a general overview, but it does not mean that one is going to be better than the other. It's just general preferences. And that's usually where I start asking people when I get somebody in, okay, What do you like? Tell me about you. How are you going to use this? Give me a little of your history, because this bike specifically, I get a lot of petite ladies that get very interested in it. And then, you know, and it might be 50, 60-year-old ladies, and they're scared of this bike. And then I get the 85-year-old Harley mama who loves it. So it really is, again, it's a preference thing. And so we've got some guidelines, but it's ultimately learning the customer, asking them. And one of the big things we'll talk about a little more in this is test riding. Shouldn't buy a bike unless you test ride it. Okay, so test riding is, we're going to go into that a little more, but this is kind of watch outs for ordering online. So again, we already talked about the electric bike, what is an electric, what isn't, and a fact that out there in the market, they get to put all that on the consumer for the most part. They're giving you the wattages and the information, and because there's so many different state laws and they don't know where everybody's coming from and they can't assume liability, yada yada, that's on you. You buy a 1,000-watt motor and it doesn't work for you in your state, in your area. You've just bought something. They may or may not let you return it, especially depending on when you learn that it was not legal in your state. So low upfront costs may equal higher repair costs down the road. So with the lower front cost, a lot of times they're poorly designed. It's cheap components. Things are crammed in. They fail sooner. They're harder to access because they're not meant to be repaired. So some of the lower end brands online, like Rads, aren't so bad. Not great. I'm not in love with those bikes, but it's better than something you're going to go buy at Costco for $900. So that, something like that, it's meant to fail and be replaced. They do not want you to repair it. They want you to buy another bike from them. Other bikes are meant to be repaired. So there's that piece of it. You don't know what it will feel like, so that's where the test ride piece comes in. Like I just told you about this bike right here and some of the feedback I've gotten from those folks. But that bike over there, some folks come in, that's a cute little folder bike. Oh yeah, I'll love this bike. Well, I don't like the posture, or I don't like the fact that it doesn't have front forks. So there's so many different trade-offs to bikes that you really testing them, feeling them out, knowing what you like and don't like is going to help you, even if you do end up ultimately buying one online. Finding somebody that has a Rad, if you're interested in a Rad, that's really helpful to know you're going to like it, because oftentimes people are like, oh, my friend got this, they love this bike. But you are not your friend. You may have some common interests, but at the end of the day, you are not your friend. Increased safety risk from self-assembly. So that's a big one, and I totally get this, especially because a lot of people do go towards online because it's so much cheaper. And then they go and assemble it themselves, and they don't pay for somebody to assemble it. So not sure what everybody in this room knows about bikes, but I, before owning a bike shop, did not have torque wrenches. I didn't have the tensiometers for tensioning my spokes and stuff. And I paid REI, was the place I always used to take my bike before I bought the shop. And I paid them to do it for that reason, because I knew I didn't have those things. I've learned so much more about bikes since then and why self-assembly is not a good idea. We've had people assemble, pedals fall off mid-ride, they lose a pedal, can't even tell us where it's at. The headsets are wobbly as heck. There's just a lot of things where people are doing things with the best intentions, thinking I'm kind of handy, but if the torque setting is, 5 Newton meters, do you know what 5 Newton meters feels like? Do you know what 35 Newton meters feels like by hand? Most people don't. I definitely didn't. And that can either cause things to be loose and wobbly, or people over torque and then they become tight and become safety risk for other reasons. So it's best, even if you're going to go online, have a professional assemble it, unless, again, you are a bike guru and you know what you're doing and you have all the tools in your shop. Warranty hassles. When you buy online, you're going to be dealing with whatever the company is. Some of them are pretty good to their customers. Some of them are atrocious. And then there's the in-between of it's a good for you, they're good to you as a customer, but you just don't know the lingo that they know, and so you keep telling them about the thingy that's over here, and you think it moves the thing, and they're like this, so they send you one part, and you're like no, and they give you the instructions, and you put it in, and you're like that doesn't work, and so then you have to send it back, and they give you the next part. So there's a kind of that middle ground. Again, unless you're super savvy, that can be a hassle. We're going to do that. If you get one from a local bike shop, we're going to take care of all that stuff for you. Proprietary parts, that's another big thing. So I've had customers buy online, wait 5-6 months for a set of tires. There is a company right now online that is going through a massive recall. I have a bunch of their clients coming to me looking for alternative bikes because they're like, they can't tell us when they're going to have good tires for us to ride on, and I use this to commute all the time. I had a gentleman last year, a company online, they have a proprietary derailleur system for one of their bikes. He was out of a bike for 7 months. That was his commuter to and from work. Gratefully, he had a regular bike, but that altered his life and how he did things, and he had to think about, well, I'm going to arrive sweaty now, and I have to take extra time to find the bathroom at the, I think it was a McDonald's across the street, and kind of freshen up before I go to work. So those are all considerations, especially for somebody that's doing, you're a regular commuter. Or if you're just a fair weather rider, you go out and you find out in April as you're gearing up for the long season, only to find out, well, I'm going to miss all of riding season because I'm out of a bike tire for 5 months. So those are things to consider with some of those online ones. At our shop, we've seen issues from the pandemic just like everybody else, but for the most part, if I can't get you the exact 27.5-inch tire you need, I can get you, that came with your bike, I can get you a good equivalent somewhere else. So the derailleur systems, the brakes, all those for the most part we can get somewhere else to get you on the road. Delayed repairs, that becomes an issue, again, kind of for some of the reasons that we were talking about. And then the one we've kind of hit on multiple times, bikes marketed as electric bikes that aren't electric bikes. All right, so this goes into my test ride. So I've got this slide and the next slide, and I'm going to tell you a couple of stories. This bike right here, which is this bike, I had a sweet woman from Crescent City drive all the way out. She booked a hotel in Ashland. She knew. She'd done all of her research on this bike, and she knew this was the bike for her. I asked her, have you ever been on an electric bike before? Well, no, I haven't. Okay, I'm going to have you get on this guy first, just because this is a little easier bike. It's more mellow. If you haven't been on one, I want to make sure you feel comfortable on this before I put you on this guy. We put her on this. She loved it, smiling, happy, super excited. Put her on her bike, and she got about 40 feet in the parking lot and came back in tears and was petrified. She's like, I can't ride this bike. She left, went to lunch, apparently had a sobbing conversation with her husband because she was super disappointed. She drove all that way. Fortunately for her, her husband was like, honey, if you love it, I don't care that it's more expensive, buy the bike that you want. She went home on this bike. But that is an example of test ride, don't just buy. I have the opposite on the next slide. I have a great friend in Bend, Oregon, who found out was buying the shop last year, and he's like, no way, I'm looking at getting an electric bike. Actually, a couple of them, because I want to take my friends out. And he's like, tell me when you close, I'm going to buy an electric bike for you. Cool, thanks. This is the bike he came and told me he wanted. This is actually the most popular bike in my shop. It is a great bike. Why do you want that bike, Matt? Well, Mom told me it's a great bike. She rode somebody's bike, yada, yada. Okay, have you been on it before? No, but I've rode electric bikes, so I'm good. I'm not selling you just any bike. Go take the darn bike for a spin. He goes for a spin in the parking lot, comes back. This is a wimpy bike. It's not a wimpy bike, but this is torque sensing, and he'd been on cadence sensing, and like I said, cadence feels a little zippier. This has a 500-watt motor. He walked out with this, which is a big, massive cargo bike with cadence sensing, and that motorcycle-looking bike, which has a bigger 750-watt motor and is also cadence sensing. He really liked the speed, zippiness of the bikes. And then he drew himself towards this bike after I pushed him away, because he's like, ooh, I could go out and put a person on the back, and there could be 3 riders. So again, going in, buying a bike, you think you know what you want, test ride it, figure that out. I get a lot of people that really like this motorcycle bike, and they realize it's not got a step through and they just can't get their leg over it anymore. That is a common thing. I do get gentlemen that will not go through the step through until they realize, like, I'm not swinging my leg over a bike anymore. And there's no shame in that. None whatsoever. I know there was a time in my life after some surgeries I wasn't getting my leg over the back of a bike either. Okay. So that's kind of a lot of the bike stuff. I am going to open it up for questions, but just like I said, we're going to talk a little bit about the sustainability and health pieces of it. So we got one slide on each of those, and we're just doing high level. We can go into nitty gritty, but we'll keep it high level and leave it for your guys' questions at the end. So sustainability, reduce carbon footprint. Some people say, and especially some of my best friends who are adamant non-electric bicycle bike riders. Reduce your carbon footprint. Yes, it has a bigger carbon footprint than a regular bike, but if we're talking about using it to replace your car, for people like me, which is what I do, I use it to go back and forth to my shop or to get groceries, then it's significantly less on the manufacturing side. It takes less raw materials, less power input to build an electric bike versus a car, a motorcycle, a moped, any of those things. And then if it's electric versus petroleum or diesel, biofuel, obviously there's that part of the sustainability as well. Big thing with that's happening with electric bikes, especially in big cities, is the last mile delivery. Instead of having those big semi trucks and UPS drivers blocking these alleyways and stuff, people are going electric bikes to maneuver around because the amount of the places they can get. And some of these bikes, specifically like the big cargo ones, they have the capability to pull a lot. That red bike is made by a company called Turn. They make a cargo line motor version that's used often in conjunction with a trailer that has a motor and battery as well. And so in places like, definitely in Europe, but in places like Portland and New York City and stuff, they're starting to use those for the last mile delivery, which cuts down emissions, eases traffic congestion, and a lot of other benefits. Possibility for fossil-free charging. If you're driving a regular car, obviously we can't go fossil-free. You can if you are driving an electric car, but the demand for electricity is much more significant than it is for an electric bike. So, you know, regular 110, 120 in your house electric bike, you've got a special service that you're installing if you go with an electric car. So most people could hook up a small solar panel if they needed to charge an electric bike, and we do get that a lot where folks are making conversions because they're out camping in the backwoods or doing things and they want to take their bikes with them. There's even a couple of gentlemen from India who have toured more than 10,000 miles around the US on electric bikes without stopping to charge because they're hooked up to solar panels. So there's a lot more possibilities with them. Reduced medical footprint, and we're going to conjunction that with the next slide over. But at the end of the day, it's cleaner air. Cleaner air means better breathing, less, respiratory issues for those of us that are going to get those, and then better health overall. When people start to bring this into their life, because a lot of people can't ride a regular bike, they get taken out by the hill and they give up. This allows them to get up those hills, and the studies show that people that have electric bikes ride them more often and much further than they do regular bikes, and so they're actually more beneficial for people's health. Even though you don't have to work as hard, you're doing it so much more that you're getting that constant benefit. Instead of going out for a ride once every few months, you might be daily, weekly, or whatever, but it's more routine. Less traffic congestion, again, less of that, less fuel in the air, but that slow traffic congestion is much worse than even just cars going down the road. And then less construction for parking spaces, which is a big overlooked benefit to bikes. So if you go to places like Europe, you can see big parking spaces piled full of bikes, hundreds of bikes like our parking spaces. And the less of those we have, more people riding bikes, and we go towards some of those and reducing the need for the number of car spaces. It provides more room for housing and less, construction materials just for cements of slabs sitting around. All right. Health benefits, big one that people come to us for is managing weight. I do get the folks that come and buy an electric bike and see me 3 or 4 months later and they're like, I lost 40 pounds. And I'm like, that's awesome. So it's a big step for people that have had strokes or knee injuries or other conditions where, again, they can't run, they can't ride a regular bike, and this is a way for them to find that happy medium. Because most people don't like sitting at a gym on a trainer bike. As with most exercise, plenty of studies out there saying it'll improve your mood. Biking, even with an electric bike, as long as you're pedal assist, if you go full throttle, you're not going to get those benefits, and I guess that's the caveat. But if you go pedal assist, you're going to be doing strength resistance, so you're going to be building muscle and bone. Better sleep from exercise, improved brain function. I wrote an article in the Locals Guide last month about specifically improved mood and cited Cycle Boom, which is a study done for older folks, and just the benefits of cycling that they've seen on folks, and e-bike related. It was both regular and e-bike, and saying that you don't need to gut it out on a regular bike, just e-biking is enough for improved brain function for adults. Reduce stress, and again, reduce risk of cardiovascular disease, developing type 2, diabetes, cancers, improving your ability to do daily activities and prevent falls, especially as you get older, and increase your chances of living longer. So I think, again, most of those are intuitive, but again, all the reasons for it. I want healthier people. I want to help with sustainability. So it's nice when two things can come together into one. And now we open it up for questions. Yes?
So, how heavy are the bikes?
This bike specifically is 62. That bike without the basket and my helmet and stuff sitting in it are 48.9 pounds. They vary. If you go carbon fiber, you can get lighter. It's such a big caveat. I don't know if anybody's ever seen those little Jetson wheel bikes, like the really cheap ones that you can get at Costco or Sam's Club somewhere around here. They're like smaller than these mini little things, probably 25 pounds. You're not going to go more than 2 or 3 miles on the bike probably, and I think it's designed for kids, but I do see adults riding them. But then they can get up 80, 90 pounds. Some of the ones that are built for higher weights and are riding the edge with the 750 motors or right at the 1,000 watts, those are going to get heavier. But I would say average bike is somewhere between 50 and 60. So on these two bikes, you can plug them either in directly to the bike, and I didn't bring the keys to pull the batteries out, but you can either plug them directly into the bike or you can pull the battery and charge them. So on this bike, there is a little flap. This is not super easy to see, but there is a little plug in there, and that's all you have to do. So that's directly into this battery, which this is the battery pack on this bike. So it doesn't matter whether it's on the bike or not, it's going to be the same port. All you're going to do, it's going to look kind of like a laptop charger in that there's a brick in the center and the two plugs that come together. But yeah, any outlet inside your house should suit it just fine. Batteries are going to take 4 to 6 hours typically to charge. There's some batteries that might take 8, 9 hours to charge. It's going to depend on the make, the manufacturer, how big your battery is. Like this guy is a 13 amp hour battery. That's average, maybe even on the small side now. A lot of companies are going bigger. Some of our bigger batteries are 20, 21 amp hours. The more amp hours basically means there's more cells in it. And if you were to open up any of these batteries, they basically look like a bunch of really big AA's. They're not AA's, but they look like a bunch of AA's stacked in line. And so a 14 amp hour might have, I'm just going to throw a number out there, don't quote me, 25, and a 20 amp hour might have 40. So the more of those there are, the longer it's going to take to charge them all up. So that's why it's not one specific number, and it will vary based on your bike and what you have.
Do you ever have to worry about your battery being stolen?
Yes. So I'm going to say that in 2 different ways. One, if somebody steals your bike, obviously they've got your battery. And that's a reality for anybody that knows anything about bikes. You can deter people, but people still break into banks. They can break and get your bike if they really, really want it. But there are manufacturers out there that, without naming them, that have had histories of, and it became really well known that basically as long as you had one of their blanks, you could break into any one of their bikes, and those were being sold online. So that's something good to know. Secondly, I have had issues with customers. They break apart, so all of these have latches and different things in them that are going to hold your battery. And if you've locked it properly, it's not going anywhere. But what happens is some people they don't want to come in and get it repaired and spend that little bit of money. And then you are at risk. If that's not functioning correctly and you can just yank your battery off without the key, then somebody can steal it. These bikes all require, and all the ones we sell at our shop, require you to have a key. And they are individually coded. They are not one size fits all for every Magnum and every turn. They're all different, but that is an issue with some bike brands that are out there.
And how heavy are these batteries?
Again, it's going to vary based on the bike. These guys right here, that guy is close to 8 pounds, and that one is closer to 7. They're both 7 point something, but this one's closer to 8 and that one's closer to 7.
I could easily keep 3 batteries with me.
Yes.
You know what I mean? Yeah.
Yeah. Go ahead.
So, you know, just with the, do most of these parts come from China? And, you know, has that become difficult in terms of getting parts or, you know, or the bikes?
So I will say bike manufacturing is generally, unless you're getting a fully customized bike, from Southeast Asia somewhere. So Shimano makes all of its shifters where it makes its shifters. Tektro makes its brakes where it makes its brakes. It doesn't necessarily mean China. This bike, as parts from all over, I do believe the frame's Chinese. That bike's frame is made in Taiwan. No, that bike's frame is made in Vietnam. Let me correct myself. That one's Vietnam. So it's ebbed and flowed with the pandemic like everything has, and China has been a little more stricter about the shutdowns. Generally for us, most of our brands have recuperated from it. Getting parts, most of the supply chain has caught up. We will still have occasional outages of certain products, but again, if it's something mainstream and it's not proprietary, if you need to have your brakes completely redone, like, I don't know, you had a horrible wreck and you crashed all your levers and all of it needs to be replaced. Okay, you may want to go with Tektro and you can't get your hands on Tektro. Well, we could get you Magura or Clark's depending on your budget and which direction you want to go. We can re-outfit the whole system. It's when there's other, you know, like the one guy I was telling you about with the derailleur. The derailleur was going to be like I think a $40, $50 part for him. Redoing the whole system was going to be 200 and some bucks, and it was going to be very different. With these, we can usually find something compatible if you haven't destroyed the whole system, even in a system to retrofit you. It's never like Tektro's out of everything. It's Tektro is out of the specific E350 right now. It's not that they're out of everything. So that's, you know, there's still supply chain issues, but that was inherent even before the pandemic. They would go through that kind of stuff because people manufacture based on projections, and sometimes the projections are off. Sometimes they overshoot and sometimes they undershoot. Yeah. Go ahead.
Along with the batteries,
Yep.
I'm assuming they all go different distances, or how long does the battery actually?
Yes.
What's the range?
So that's going to vary, depend on your bike, and it's going to depend on 3 other factors. So there's the set wattage of the motor and the battery amperage or battery watt hours. So that's going to be 2 things that are going to be specific to the bike, and you can choose your bike appropriately for that. Most companies are going to give you their range, and they're going to do it in one of 2 ways, and I'll come back to that in a second. The second thing that's going to be the other 3 things that are going to be a variable are going to be related to you. What kind of terrain are you riding on a regular basis? If you're doing more hills, you're going to get less efficiency than just like in your vehicle. What is your weight as a rider, and or what else are you towing with you? I have a bike, I can get 80 to 90 miles on my bike when it's just me. Anybody that knows me or has visited my website, I have a 150-pound dog that I tow on a 100-pound trailer. When it's me and the dog, we're lucky to get 30 miles. So that makes a big difference. What's your weight, what's your load? The other piece is how do you ride it? And so there are days when I'm fit as a fiddle and feeling happy and I crank on my bike and it's a level 1 pedal assist and I never come off a level 1. And there's days where I'm tired and I'm dragging and I crank it up to a 3. It's not going to go as far if I'm using more juice and more energy out of it. So that does vary. The lower end bikes tend to have a lower range. The higher end bikes tend to have a higher range. We've got mountain bikes with 250 watt motors that can take people up to 130 miles. But if you listen to the folks and the history that those companies have, they'll tell you, well, it can go up to 130, but most of our mountain bike riders get 90 miles out of it. This bike specifically says 25 to 50. If you're a lighter weight rider doing pretty mellow stuff, yeah, you're going to probably see the 50 out of it. But if you're a heavier rider, not so much. I have a bike, if we go back, and I'm going to do that here real quick. So this bike, they say 45 miles asterisk with their 14 amp hour battery, which is the standard. Prior to me taking over the shop and prior to COVID, Jerry Solomon had this bike as a rental. His customers would often take it out and get 50, 70 miles on a charge, even though it said 45 asterisks. And then they have a 20 amp hour battery you could put in there, and that's supposed to get 60 miles asterisks. And I don't have as much data because it hasn't been around as long, nor was it used as a rental. But we have folks that can get 80 plus miles out of them. So it really, again, it depends. And then I have folks that think they're going to get 50 miles out of a bike, and it's like, well, this is coming back to that's how do they say it? Is it an average or is it an up to? If it says, there was a gentleman that picked a bike because he saw 50 and he saw 45, and so he went with the 50, but the wording was up to 50, and the other one was average 45. So up to 50 is the most, average 45 means there's probably quite a bigger range. And so he was only getting 25, 30 miles out of it because he was a heavier dude, and it's like, well, that's because of this verbiage. So again, understanding some of those is important when you pick.
Does it have a meter on there that shows you how much time you have left or how much amps you have left?
It's going to, again, go back to the bike. Some of them are very simplistic. They will show you 4 bars and will tell you basically you have 4 bars, so you have somewhere between 75 and 100%. Third bar is 50 to 75. Others will give you actual percentages. And we have one bike in our shop. It's a mountain bike that's got like a smart feature, and it tells you projected miles if you stay, based on your riding, if you stay at that level. And it's different in its regular mode versus its smart mode. And it's a mountain bike, so it's got very technical differences about it. So there's super smart ones, and then there's ones that are kind of a little more generic. That's going to depend on the manufacturer. They kind of dictate that. The other thing to consider, and it is not something we have talked about with those, hub motors, we talked about them not being as efficient. So one of the drawbacks with hub motors compared to mid-drives also happens to be how they respond with battery. So this brand is Surface 604. They have a display that reads percentage, and oftentimes people will go for a ride and it'll stay pretty consistent and then it'll drop real quick. Or it'll drop and they get off and they've got 15 extra percent. The hub motors don't read as well. And so there's a little bit of disparity and a little more fudge that you get used to as a rider, and you know what that is. Mid-drives tend to be more consistent at their reading as they go. It's not universal. Again, quality of the bike versus, you could have a poor quality mid-drive versus a high quality hub, and it might be more consistent on the hub. But generically, mid-drives are going to give you more accurate readings on your battery power. Yes?
I'm going to plug you because I bought my electric bike from them
Thank you.
a month ago, and I love it. I just love it. It has the throttle, and I only use that, like she said, when you're just like, I can't get up this hill, and you kick it in. So I just want to say, yeah, they're great business to
Thank
work
you.
with. And then I did want to ask, like for me who wants to just do simple maintenance at home, air in the tires, and then what are other minor things where you could just go, okay, you'd want to do this, or just...
I mean, the big two, it's air in the tires and your chain. So as long as you're doing regular maintenance of lubing of the chain and cleaning of the chain, because that's going to get dirty, those are the big two. The chain will wear down eventually no matter what, because it's a mechanical friction going against each other with the teeth. But if you keep it in pretty good shape, it's going to wear down less quickly. So a couple of things to note with that. It's like regular bike maintenance. We personally prefer like a wax lubrication versus an oil. We all know what oil's like. It attaches and attracts everything. So it's going to attract, if you oil your chain, you're going to attract more dirt and debris, which is going to get in there and wear down the teeth and wear down everything on the chain. Secondly, it's wiping the chain. When you do lube it, you don't want to just lube it up and let it drip. You want to clean off the excess, because again, the excess is going to attract more. Those are the two big things with the bike that you need to pay attention, is tire pressure and your chain. Over time, the tire is going to wear. You're going to want to change that out. Most of the electrical components, you're not going to mess with or do anything. There's no maintenance and repair to those until they fail, and hopefully they last you for a while. And every company, again, is going to have some amount of warranty, but that'll also depend on how you treat the bike. These bikes are water resistant. They are not waterproof, so you might have a premature failure if you, say, take it through a river, which we had one unfortunate gentleman do pretty recently. He told us he only put it through about 12 inches, but there was water pouring out of his light at the top, and we're like, I think you dumped it. But regardless, it either migrated up or he got it in farther than he told us. So they are water resistant, not waterproof. So with that, some considerations is keeping them covered. It's not really a maintenance thing, but if you can't store it in a garage, keeping it covered outside. The pounding rain, is going to be worse than just the occasional riding it in the rain. If you do have to clean it because you went through a mucky field or some cool trail when you were on some trip and it rained and you want to wash it off, light hose, do not use your thumb, no pressure whatsoever. Light hose, hand wash it down, and a light hose to rinse. Because again, like on this bike right here, I'm not going to tilt it upside down, but you can see these wires running in. They run in through a hole. There's a gasket that's trying to keep some of that water out, which is going to help with the residual splash. But if you start spraying pressure or you submerge it into a small creek, it's not going to stop it, and then it'll get in there. And we all know what water does to electricity, and that's no different on this bike. Yeah.
Tire size, is it more of a aesthetic thing, or is it more of a functioning, like larger tires versus smaller tires?
It can be all of the above in preference. So generally, historically, if you look at road bikes, they're very skinny, aerodynamic, and that's because they're going to provide the least resistance. And when you are riding a bicycle, not having resistance is really important when you don't have a motor. The width of the tire and the size of them is going to affect some of the range of the bike, but you're going to know that based on the specs that the bike manufacturer gave you. The motor overcomes the resistance that we feel as humans. Unless you're super fine-tuned into it, you're not going to notice the difference probably going from one size to another on a bike. With that being said, a lot of folks, because that resistance is being compensated with the motor power, they're going to fatter wire tires, because when you roll over a crack or hit a little piece of gravel or whatever with a skinny tire, often we do this. And the wider the tire, the more ability you have to roll over that with, less of that risk for safety. Now, that's something like this and this. Those are kind of median range. Now, once you get into the super fat tires, the 4.5, 5-inch wide tires, which we definitely sell those too, they're more for niches. Like, most people don't want that heavy a bike because this isn't going to be fun to pedal if you lose your power, but a really big fat tire bike is going to be even harder to pedal. But people that get into those often are huntsmen, fishermen, people that are going to go off-road, get off trail when they're rolling over sticks and leaves and stuff. Having that extra wider tire gives them the cushion to get out there and explore more areas. Definitely big for folks that like riding in the sand or that like to ride in the snow. That allows them to float up, and because they're heavy bikes and they don't sink in as quickly. So there's a lot of play that happens with those bigger, fatter tires. So it's really dependent on what you're going to do and what's going to be the right fit for you. Yeah. Yes?
I've heard of a thing called a PAS sensor. Do you know any
Yeah, pedal assist sensor.
Oh, that's what-
PAS just stands for pedal assist. Yep. Yep.
And do these things have regenerative braking?
These do not, and most mass-marketed bikes are not going to have it. You can get it installed on your bikes. It would be something that you'd have to like retrofit and find somebody to install or be handy enough to do yourself. One of my mechanics has an old Pedigo Stretch, if anybody's familiar with it. It's a huge, beefy cargo bike. It weighs over 70-some pounds by itself. He likes to take his partner. They love to go backcountry camping. He loads it up with bags and tents and all the goodies. It's probably a very, very heavy, close to 400-pound bike by the time they've loaded it all up. He has regen on his bike, but the reason why it works, and I'll tell you the little scenario here in a second, is because his is so heavy. That's why it works on cars. Most bikes are too light. So riding around town, he doesn't get much regen. Where he gets it is like if he's gone out to Howard Prairie, Lake Hyatt, or somewhere out there, and he comes down Dead Indian Memorial, he can get between 25 to 30% of his battery life back. Most of us are not doing that ride, and we're not doing that ride with that much weight. So for most people, the cost of putting it in there isn't worthwhile. 3 to 8% is usually the max you're going to see, even if you're getting some decent hills around town. Not saying it couldn't be worth it for some people, but they aren't marketing them because it's just not for most of the riders. Yep.
Can you ride these just like a regular bike? Say the battery goes, and is it difficult?
They are heavier, so it'll be more difficult. And it's going to come down to you and what you like to do and what you are capable of. I have I mentioned my 150-pound dog with his trailer. I have powered that dog and trailer under my own 2 legs. I can do that on flats. I can't do it on a hill. I just can't. And so, you know, for me, he's a big reason why I have an electric bike. He's getting older, and one day I know I'm not going to get him in the car anymore. So we're getting him adapted early so he's ready when that time happens. But yeah, so they are harder to pedal, not impossible to pedal, but it's going to come down to your strength. I don't know if any of you have heard of Dot. She's a little bit infamous in this town. Some of you probably do. We put her on a trike today, an electric one, and she was petrified of the electric because we're trying to find a good fit for Dot. And we're going to do some more testing with her, but just getting her used to the tricycle, I mean, I knew she was a badass, but she's pedaling this tricycle up a slight hill, and it's easily 2 times as heavy as any bike she's ever ridden. And I'm just like, I want legs like you when I'm 94. Now, Dot's been doing it forever, and she had the power to do it. I don't know that everybody that gets on a trike is going to be able to do that, or one of the electric bikes. So it's, again, it comes down to you, what's your stamina, what's your strength, and what do you want to deal with. Like, I can pedal some things. Do I want to pedal some things that are that hard? No.
So is it you can just ride it though, can't you? Like if you're on the greenway and you're on flat ground, you don't need assist. You can do
Yeah.
it. And is it that hard?
It's going to depend on the type of bike. This will be harder than that one to pedal because of the weight difference and because of the size of the tires.
Okay.
There's a specific brand at my shop. It's a folding bike, and I remember I don't usually take 2 bikes out for when I do pictures, but I wanted to do folding versus fully assembled side by side, so I went down with one of my mechanics to take pictures. He was cruising, and I'm like, hey, what setting are you on? And he's like, I'm on a level 3. I'm like, okay. And he's like, why? And I'm like, I don't have the power on at all. This is a really nice bike to pedal. Like, just no power. And we were on a flat section of Bear Creek Parkway, so it was great. But that's going to depend. My bike that I personally ride right now is not as easy to pedal as the bike I was just mentioning because it's got fatter tires, they're knobby. Smooth versus knobby makes a difference. There's so many factors, just like with a regular bike, that's going to make a difference for you.
But if you want more of a workout, you can do that with the assist.
Yeah, and that's kind of the nice thing. Like if you have assist, part of the thing I really appreciate about it is, like I said, there are days, most days I'm going to ride a level 1, especially to and from Ashland. I have no need for more assistance than a level 1. But when I carry my dog and I'm going up the hill, like I live down there on Orange and Hellman, and I go down the little dip by the Recology area, getting up that hill, I'm cranking it up to a 4 because, yeah, I don't want that kind of a workout. I mean, that's the point of the electric bike. I don't want to stand on the pedals and grind it out. I want to get up it. I'll go slow, but I'm going to get up it seated on my bike. And then there's days where, like, I'm like, I don't want to get in the car, but I'm tired. I might put it on a 3 or 4 then just to make it easier on myself because I'm dragging. I had a late night. I don't feel good, whatever it is. So you can dictate that, and you can dictate if you want to take it off. We're talking about ease. So I'm here. My ride is slight downhill almost the entire way home, minus that little dip. There's times I've gotten out of the parking lot and made it a mile down the road, and I'm like, oh, I haven't turned it on yet. So, you know, I start to notice it when the resistance on the incline comes in, but I can definitely pedal without it, and that's one of those nice things. If you say you went to Medford and you know, oh, crud, I've only got 40% left, that's a little faster than I thought. Well, if you know you're going downhill for a while, shut it off, pedal your bike, turn it back on when you hit the hills coming back into Ashland or Talent or wherever you're going to be. Yeah. Other questions? There's one more thing I kind of do want to talk about. I want to take questions first.
I just do lithium-ion batteries.
These ones are lithium-ion. There are still other ones, nickel, cadmium, and lead acid and stuff out there, but these are lithium-ion, and exclusively that's kind of what we sell at the shop. I don't think there's anybody locally that sells anything but lithium-ion.
How long do they last? Normal
Lifespan?
Yeah, like average.
So the batteries are a function of cycles. And so the more you ride and charge, the quicker they're going to deplete. So that's part of the thing when you're picking a bike is considering the life of the battery. This bike brand and a lot of ours say 5 years average life. Now, each company has picked a number of miles, whether that's 1,500 miles a year or whatever, but they've got their standard, and that's how they pick the life of the battery. That bike back over there is expected to last 10 years. So just on the surface, like that's almost twice as expensive as this bike. That's also part of the reason that it's more expensive. You're going to replace the battery in 10 years versus 5 on this one. With the 5-year part, again, that's a caveat. It's a matter of life cycles. If you ride your bike 30,000 miles a year and the average for 5 years is 1,500, you're not going to make it to year number 3. If you ride it 500 miles a year, you might make it to year 8 or 9. So it's really going to depend on how you ride it. The other parts of it are charging it, heat and cold, and travel with it. So there's 3 big things we tell all of our customers when they come in with their bikes and buy it and they're all happy. First, you're putting on a rack or in a truck, take the battery out. You're going to take that battery out and sit it on the floorboard or your seat somewhere so it's not rattling in the back of your bike. The vibration there could cause, depending on time, wear over time, you could have arcing issues and other issues, just even fit. You were talking about being able to lock them or not. Things wear out if they get loose enough where somebody can pop it off with their hand. So there's a number of reasons why you want to take that out of your bike when you travel. Second is kind of the extreme heat and cold. Every bike manufacturer is going to tell you in their manual where the ideal temperatures to charge. They vary a little. Rough numbers that we tend to tell people is between 45 and 90 degrees Fahrenheit. But again, you want to look at your specific manufacturer, see what they're telling you to do. And that's charging. Charging is harder on the bike than riding it. So while you could ride in 30 degrees, you can ride at 100 degrees. Charging is a different process, and you do want to really keep it in that temperature range. So if you've got a garage that's climate controlled, cool. If not, take it in the house when it gets really hot out. If your garage is 130 at 110, put it in the house to charge. If you've got a shed or a backyard and you can't charge it when it's 20 degrees here, take it in the house and charge it. So the extreme heat and cold are important, and the other one is how you charge. So my bike, again, 80, 90 miles, I'm going to ride it at least 10 times probably to and from town before I'm going to charge it. I'm going to try to get it down to 20%, close to that, before I'm going to charge it up. The ideal range is between 20 and 80 for most bikes. The battery management system, we were talking about all those cells in there. Again, it's got to level load all the cells because they're going to deplete at different ranges. And that level loading in the beginning and the end are the hardest part of the charge cycle for it. So if you're super, super detailed and can stick to 2080, great, you're going to get the longest life. It's not detrimental to the bike to get it up to 100. I do charge mine to 100 all the time, but I ride it multiple times. I don't deplete it by 10% and charge it to 100. I get it down lower, unless I know I'm making a long trip to Medford. If I've got 40% and I'm going to Medford and back, because I like to climb at the rock gym and that's a regular thing I do, well, I'm going to bump it at least to 60 to 70 just to make sure I'm going to get home safe. And you'll learn that part of your bikes as well if that's the route you go. So with that 20-80%, the kind of do's and don'ts, the big ones are don't let it set. So if you get home and say you depleted down to 0, your bike's going to have some residual energy in that battery. And it's going to shut itself off to protect itself. That's what that battery management system should be doing, especially on a decent quality bike. So you're going to get home, put it on the charge. Don't let it set. If it fully discharges, if you let it set it's down to 0 and you let it set for the next few weeks, it may fully discharge. Once it's fully discharged, we may not be able to revive the battery. Sometimes we can if somebody's like, oh, I let it discharge and I did that last week and now it won't start. They bring us the battery. Sometimes we can wake them up and kind of go reboot it from the back door, but doesn't always work. So that's like the biggest no-no. It doesn't often happen like that where somebody goes home and forgets to charge it after it hit 0. What usually happens is mom got sick and they had to go take care of her. I had an accident and I broke my leg and I haven't been on it. I just moved and we stuck it in storage and it's been a year and a half. In those cases, if you know that's coming and you're not going to touch the bike, at least grab the battery and put it somewhere in the house to remind you to check it once a month. And just see where it's at. Again, every manufacturer is going to be different. Some are going to tell you to leave it at 80%. Some are going to tell you to leave it at 66%. But they're going to tell you charge it to here and let it sit. And then if it starts to drop, charge it back up. You just want to make sure it doesn't get to 0 where it can fully discharge. And again, that's the most common one we see at our shop. There's the other side of that where you overcharge. So these machines are talking, if there's a charger on the floor, and there's not one right now, but if there was a charger and it was charging this bike, it's got a little neurotic relationship with the bike. Hey, you got enough energy? And the bike goes, yeah, I got enough. He's like, you got enough? And he's like, yeah, sure, I got enough. And he's like, you got enough? And like, dude, I have enough. But he's going to keep asking him every few seconds, whatever that frequency is based on the manufacturer. And over time, all of those are a little wear and tear at the life of that battery. And so you leave it on the charge for an extra hour. Yep, you got a few dozen extra communications, or maybe it's a couple hundred extra communications. It wore a little bit of life. You do that and you treat it like a laptop. You ride it 4 miles, come home and put it on the charge. Ride it 3 miles, come home, put it on the charge. You've now done that millions of extra times, and that battery, there's a bike shop in town, they had a 10-year battery. One of their customers killed it in 2.5 years because that's exactly how he treated the bike. We haven't had one that extreme, but we have had customers. Me being kind of a sustainability nut, that's one of those big things. Any of the old customers, whether they're mine and I'm just having that conversation to remind them, or it's one of Jerry's old customers, hey, how you treating your battery, how you do that, because we want to catch that. It's the most expensive thing you're going to replace on the bike, and of all the things, it's really the most hazardous because the bike's going to live on. Most of those parts aren't going to fail for a very, very long time. The battery's kind of the known one, so keeping that out of landfill or even going through the recycle process, which isn't the best for the environment. It's better than landfill, but all of that, the more we can keep the longevity in the bike, I try to remind folks of the do's and don'ts with them.
So what is a battery like for one of those running?
That battery is going to be around 600. That battery over there is going to be, I think it's a 500 power pack, 900. Some of our batteries are $1,200-$1,400 depending on how big they are. So, yep, they are the most expensive thing you're going to replace. Yep. There was one other thing that I did want to talk about with the throttles because I forgot to mention it earlier. Kind of a do-don't with the throttles. So throttles are really nice. How they are intended is supposed to be to get you get to an intersection, you forgot to downshift, you need a little boost to get going so you don't mash your gears, and you take off. A little bump here or there. I'm starting on a hill, I want to get climbing. I have a 150-pound dog and a 100-pound trailer behind me. Just that little bump to get me going. Throttles are not intended to be treated like mopeds. It's going to vary, again, based on your terrain, your weight, and how you do it as a consumer, but you can burn out the parts in that by abusing the throttle. And most often where that happens for our customers are the folks that are like, hey, I use my pedal assist on a 1 or 2, but I have this really steep hill there, and I don't want to pedal at all, so I throttle up it. That is the worst place to use your throttle. It seems counterintuitive because that's where you want to use it the most, but that's the worst place. Long extended periods of high output from the battery, and this is really specific to hub motors. They, like I said, they're less efficient. That it's what's happening, and we won't get into the nitty-gritty of the physics, but you basically cannot move fast enough. You're going to be going up the hill at, say, 4 or 5 miles per hour. Feels really slow because you were just doing 16 in the flats, but you're still at least not standing on your pedals. Going slow up the hill is better than cranking that throttle. When you crank the throttle, you get 100% output from the battery battery power to the motor. The motor can't do anything with all that extra energy. It's not pushing you any faster, and so that becomes waste heat energy. And when you get waste heat energy, the wires can deal with that for a little bit, but prolonged waste heat energy and they'll start to fry, or components. Hall sensors are one of the biggest issues on our motors that burn up when there's been throttle abuse. So with that, if you wind up on a bike, and again, if you come to us, we're going to explain this to you, but if you wind on a bike, you get gifted a bike or buy one on the internet with a throttle, going up a hill, if you're not going more than 4 or 5 miles per hour, you actually want to bring your pedal assist down and lay off the throttle. So if you're at a level 5 and it's peaking out, some of them have fancy displays and they'll show you red. Some of them don't, unfortunately. If it's showing you red, bring it down a couple of pedal assist levels. And just know you're only going to go up the hill at 4 or 5 miles per hour. You're not going to get any extra assistance from the motor between, say, 3 or 4 to 5 if it's peaking out like that. And that's one of the big watch outs, because that's going to be, the motor's going to be the second most costly thing you're going to replace on the bike. We don't want you in for those motor repairs any sooner than you absolutely have to. Again, that's a big misconception with the throttles. It seems intuitive, but and I do have customers that really genuinely do want the exercise and want a bike ride, but they live on one of these big hills in Ashland. If you find yourself being one of those, or one of your friends being one of those folks, it may come down to being a moped. They do make I would say a higher wattage mid-drive motor, if you've got the money and can find the right one, can get you up some of the steepest steep hills, but it's definitely not going to be a hub motor. This will go up Park Street just fine for most people. Again, capability it does play as a factor in there. Most of our bikes go up Park Street for most people just fine. People are a little weaker, maybe a little older and don't have the stamina they used to have, it might not work for them and they might need a different power output. But my mechanics and I take these up Park Street for people that are familiar, that really steep street under the Wonderland trails and stuff. These all go up there for us. I can get most of our bikes up there going 7-8 miles per hour myself, but everybody's got a different capability. So that's kind of my watch out with throttles. They are a wonderful thing. I have one on my bike. I really appreciate it for the dog, but I don't use it to cruise around. On that, I guess a story. Wonderful lady bought a bike from Jerry 4 or 5 years ago, and she's been using her throttle for 4 or 5 years. And she came to us recently, and her motor was burned out. And I was like, I don't know how you got away with this for so long. Turns out, when she goes up hills, she throttles, but she's always riding with regular bike riders. So she throttles and lets them catch up, and then throttles and lets them catch up. So essentially what she was doing was letting the bike cool down a little bit, which is very different than throttling full speed the whole time. So she got away with it for 4 or 5 years, and I was like, kudos to you. I'm like, unfortunately that your motor burned up. We fixed it and replaced it for her, but you know, she was one of the lucky ones. Most people don't last that long. They'll burn it out pretty quick. Yep. Other questions?
What are the watt ratings on these motors?
This bike specifically has a 500 watt hub. That guy has a 250 watt mid-drive. Some more information on mid-drive might be when you're looking at a mid-drive, if you're on a steep hill, you want higher Newton meters of torque. So that specific guy has 50 Newton meters of torque. The bike brand on that motor is Bosch, and so that's kind of their entry-level motor. Their higher-level motors for like the mountain bikes, the CX performance motors they build, have 85, 90 Newton meters of torque. So the higher Newton meters of torque are going to make it a better hill climber. Their bikes, most of their bikes are regulated to 20 miles per hour, specific to Bosch again. So it's not a matter of getting more speed out of them, it's just more climbing power. Other questions? Yes.
So the mid-drive bike,
Yes.
are there other power options than the one that's on it right now?
250 watt?
Yeah.
Yes. So this bike specifically, no. Not 250 watts. There's a version of this bike that has 65 Newton meters of torque. So it's dependent on how we, I guess, take that question. So your question being, are there other options for a mid-drive? Yes, other options for a mid-drive. Specific to this bike, no.
Okay.
So is your question about this bike or mid-drives in general?
I guess it was just about this bike here.
Okay. But you've asked a good question, so I'm going to back up to this guy. This guy we were talking about, he's a mid-drive. The motor is right here. It's not super obvious on this picture, but it does say right down here, 1,000 watt mid-drive motor. So people will put 500, 750, 1,000 watt motors. If you're looking at a really high powered mid-drive, you probably want more of a moped, off-road, really off the beaten path kind of a bike.
I was looking at like a lightning rod.
A lightning rod?
Yeah. I mean, I just read about them.
Okay, I'm not actually familiar with that one.
So they've been out for a while, Lunicycles.
Oh, Lunicycles, okay. Yeah.
They've been carrying them, and I think they're like interchangeable as far as partnership or whatever.
Okay.
But anyway, that's a pretty big motor, and they've got like 3,000 watts and stuff like that. I do like the mid-drives myself.
Yeah.
And I would put like a Shimano, a hub or gearbox on it too, you know.
Okay.
But I don't know, so I came here because I wanted to figure out, I do want to put around some of the places where I can take a mountain bike powered. I'm new here, so I'm just like, what bikes can I take around town and be legal, and also, I guess just similar questions like everybody else.
Yeah, I mean, so again, the 3,000 watt, if that's what's on the lightning rod, that's a no-go.
Yeah.
And then it's going to vary based on where you're at. I mean, because you're going to be on BLM land in some areas, you're going to be in town in Oregon land others, and so that's all going to come into play with what your legalities are going to be. And again, do you take the bike path? I mean, speeding is still speeding in town, so some of our bikes go 20 miles per hour, but if you're in downtown Ashland, the speed limit's 20. It doesn't matter if you're on a bike or you're on a car, the speed limit's the speed limit,
I
right?
guess it's my risk tolerance.
Yep, there are people that choose to speed in a car, and sometimes you accidentally speed in a car. I know mine doesn't have cruise control, and I'll be occasionally, you look down, you're like, oop. So that does happen. I do have that experience on the bike either. Maybe that's what I should design, is cruise control on my electric bike. But yeah, I'd say that's more risk tolerance, and knowing what you need to know where. But yeah, once you get into that 1,000-watt plus motor, you're not going to be legal in Oregon for sure, anywhere. And because the federal is less than Oregon, you're not going to be legal on federal land. So that's just something to know. Somebody's private property, it's a whole different story. But I actually haven't asked them, but there's like that Southern Oregon Adventures and Shady Cove. They've got a bunch of land. I'm sure it's kind of no holds bar on their property. But they may have specific regulations because they've got liability for it. So yeah, it's more about being informed. I would say generally, you're not going to get away with anything that's listed as anything bigger than a 750-watt motor. So this guy, again, because he peaks out at 1,300, he's over the Oregon limit. So a 750 watts, about as big as you're going to get even on a mid-drive, and be legal. Yep. Yeah.
They come in different voltages. Do you like the 48 volt better, or do you have a preference?
For me personally, I find myself on mid-drives, and most of the I prefer mid-drives, let's put it that way. And I shouldn't say I always find myself on a mid-drive, but those tend to be the 36 volt output versus the 48. For me, it's my riding style preference. I've not been, to my knowledge, on a mid-drive with a 48 volt, so I wouldn't be able to compare it side by side to say I prefer one over the other. But standard at this point, and it's not 100% across the board, but typically most of your hub motors are going to be 48 volt output. A lot of the mid-drives are 36. We've definitely seen them with higher. Some of the bigger beefy ones are 52 volts. Again, if you're looking for more of that zippy up and go, the higher the voltage is probably going to feel more peppy. But there's so many variables that nothing can be isolated. It's all in context of how it's programmed and all the components that are going into the bike. Other questions? It's a lot of stuff. There's a lot to them. This is why we did this.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Definitely, it's a great fit for you too. I mean, your bank of information and the way I can see where Kelly's going. Yes, well taken care of and well informed. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, well, I'm still learning. I've only been in it a year and a half, and it's always changing, and I'm always learning new stuff too. So that's one of those things, hopefully can put out some more information as we keep figuring things out. But again, for me, this was a good starter because it's based on my little over a year in the business, and like what are the common things that people don't know, and that would be good to know and get out there into the public. Because especially it's really heartbreaking when somebody's like, oh, I saved up and I bought this, let's say $1,800 bike on that line, only to find out nobody will service it, and that nobody, technically it's not even legal or whatever. Like, that's disheartening. Or, hey, I bought this and I saved up money, like these young kids, I saved up all this money, I got this electric bike, this is how I get to and from work, and nobody will help them, or it's a proprietary part and nobody can help them. And that's super frustrating. So yeah, even helping folks, like, I don't expect everybody to walk in my bike shop and buy a bike, and my bikes aren't for everybody. We actually have a pretty good relationship with Piccadilly. They send folks to us for certain bikes. We send folks to them for other bikes. And it's really like, what's your niche? For me, I don't want your bike sitting in your garage. If you go out and you spend, whether it's $2,000 or $10,000 on a bike, because they can get really, really spendy, even the non-motorized types. If you go and spend that kind of money, like, nobody wants to spend that kind of money and just have it sit in the back room of the house or in the garage somewhere collecting dust. They want to see it get used. And so finding that right one and doing the due diligence up front is really key. And that's why I'm always like, ride the bike, please ride the bike. Because we do get those folks, Mom, mom bought a trike and she rode it 10, 12 miles and she never rode it again, or mom bought this bike. You know, it's not always mom, but you know, the couple that are in my head from recent experiences, mom rode this and you know, she was all gung-ho to ride it and then she was afraid of it and she quit riding it, or you know, mom had this and then she fell down and that's why she didn't ride it. So, you know, those kind of experiences, when there's an accident, it's kind of a different thing, but if it's not the right fit because it was scary or it wasn't powerful enough and it didn't do what somebody expected, then that's kind of the sad story of like not finding the right bike for the person. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm looking for like a trike that has an electric assist.
Mm-hmm.
So, do you sell those?
Are you looking more for a regular tricycle, not recumbent?
I don't mind that it's recumbent, but I need a full seat,
Okay.
and I need to sit basically like this.
Okay.
So-
Yeah, so we have a trike. It's got kind of a big wide bottom. It doesn't have a backrest, but it does have a big wide bottom. We could look at getting something fabricated for a backrest, and that would give you kind of an upright posture. We have one, we're a small shop, so I can't have every model in the world I'd love to have. But so we sell one that kind of fits a basic need for a lot of people. There are other ones on the market. The thing I would tell you is there's a couple of cheaper ones online, and we can talk offline because I don't want to bash a bunch of brands on this. But I can tell you which ones to steer clear of. They kind of like, they have the back seat rest, but they have high center of gravity, they go really fast, and they're really tippy. And most people that are on a trike have balance issues, and the last thing they want to do is be tipping over.